Hello, good morning. Welcome to the resumption of our Tuesday Temple Takeaway after our summer break. And I trust you enjoyed a nice breakaway with your family. And so here we are again, kicking off the autumn series of Temple Takeaway. And we're going to look at a character from the Old Testament. Remember, we looked at Peter previously from the New Testament. We're going to look in this series at the book of Jonah. And over the next 8 weeks, we'll be unpacking the book of Jonah. It's a book that will be very familiar to you. It's well known to us. It's probably from our school or Sunday school days. We know the story. And Jonah is one of the minor prophets of the Old Testament. We have the major prophets such as Isaiah, Jeremiah, etc. And then we have 12 minor prophets, and Jonah is in that category. You say he's a prophet. There's very little prophecy in the book of Jonah. There's probably just one verse in chapter 3 and verse 4 which captures the prophecy that God gave him for the Ninevites. And that's about it. And so the book really is not so much about the message. It's about the man named Jonah. And it's quite an easy read. You'll read it in probably less than 7 minutes. It's 4 chapters, all short chapters, 48 verses in total. And it's a simple read. It's an easy read. It's a brilliant short story, simple, but yet there are depths to it. And when you begin to study it, you see that there's much more going on than you first realize. The Bible talks about God's call, God's compassion, God's long suffering, and it's rich in theology. It's only considered to be a short story, but it's rich in its theological content. Jonah is sometimes referred to as the runaway prophet or the reluctant prophet or even the world's worst missionary. It's a bit harsh, I think. And while we have major prophets in the Old Testament and minor prophets, Jonah could be listed in the missing prophet list because he simply went AWOL. When God asked him to go east, he decided he wanted to go west and jumped on a boat going in the opposite direction. Now, the story of the narrative of Jonah has often, by some scholars and others, been referred to as no more than just a Jewish fable or a tale that we tell our children as a short story, but it's not really that true. To think that a man was swallowed by a great fish and a man lived in the belly of a great fish. For some people, that's just a little too far for them to understand. But I want to strongly refute that claim today and again reaffirm that Jonah was a real person living in a real place, being sent to a real place. There was a real fish, and it's a piece of genuine history. I mean, Jesus himself, years later in the Gospels, refers to Jonah and he validates the story. He affirms the story. So I guess if it's not true, it makes Jesus out to be a liar. Because Jesus went as far as to link the story of Jonah with his own death and his own resurrection. And that's a huge statement that Jesus makes about Jonah being inside the whale, the belly of the fish for 3 days. So too the Son of Man. So he links the story with the event of his death and his resurrection. And also, of course, on one occasion, Jesus said, "A greater than Jonah is among you," referring to himself. Now that would have been pretty odd statement to make if Jonah had never existed, because Jesus is saying a greater than Jonah is among you. So there's much more going on in this story than we first realized, which of course a short story, that's what we need. A good short story is all about that, where it leaves you thinking more that there's more to it. And so even though he's categorized as a prophet, it's mainly an account of his reluctance as a prophet to go on the commission that God sent him, to follow through on what God asked him to do. And if you could imagine the door on his life, if there was a door of the life of Jonah, it would perpetually have a sign up which says, "Do not disturb." And that's the way he lived his life until one day God came calling and asked him to do something that he did not approve of. So the book of Jonah is an overview today. This is the first one. This is just an overview. And when we overview it, we see some significant things. We see clearly demonstrated the sovereignty of God. God engineers the storm. God prepares the great fish. God uses the worm that we read about in chapter 4. God is in absolute control. His sovereignty is clearly displayed over his entire creation. And Jonah discovers that you cannot shake God off. Even though he tried to run, he certainly couldn't hide. And the great theme running through it, as well as the sovereignty of God, is the saving nature of God. And we do have a little window in the book into the heart of God, a heart of love, a heart of mercy, a heart of forgiveness. And that window opens for us to see that God was interested, God was deeply interested in reaching out to people that Jonah did not approve of. The Ninevites, Gentiles, in other words. And so it's the book is about Jonah himself and his prejudice and his wanting to avoid doing what God asked him to do, trying to run away and shut out the call of God. And we will explore these things over the next few weeks, because I'm sure that many a Christian has tried to shut out the voice of God on times. We've tried to avoid doing what God has asked us. If it's not palatable to us, we've tried to avoid it. We've tried to run away from the will of God. And so the book of Jonah is something that a lot of us will be able to relate to. Now, the story of and of course the story of Jonah doesn't end when he just swallowed by a whale and then the whale spits him up onto dry ground. Many people think that's the story. He's on a ship, he's thrown overboard, the whale picks him up, the great fish, and then he is spewed out. But that's only halfway through the book. That's only half the story. And chapter 3 and chapter 4 show us that there's much more to the story than that. And then, of course, when you come to the end of Jonah, it's one of two books in the Old Testament that ends with a question. It ends rather abruptly, to be honest. It's as if the book of Jonah ends in the middle of the story. And God is saying, shall I not spare the Ninevites? And Jonah doesn't have a chance to respond. The book is closed. It's left open-ended. The curtain seems to fall very suddenly. God asking the question and there's no response from Jonah. So it ends with a question, which is unusual. And it's an extraordinary ending to a book in many ways. And Jonah's left, really. We don't know how he responded. We don't know what ultimately he said. But we do know that God had the last word. And that's very fitting, isn't it? That it begins with the word of the Lord came to Jonah. It begins with God, and it certainly ends with God. And we will see over these next few weeks how Jonah disobeys the call of God and the circumstances with that, and how God brings him to a place where he brings a whole city to repentance. And God teaches him a valuable lesson. So please join me if you can for the next 8 weeks on Temple Tuesday Takeaway. And we'll be unpacking the book of Jonah. Have a read of it. In the meantime, it'll take you about 7 minutes. Familiarise yourself with it. And we will look to start with chapter 1 next week. The Lord bless you all. Take care. Bye-bye.